I cleaned their kitchen every morning as a thank you for letting me stay. One day, I found a note on the counter that read, "We're not running a retirement daycare." My daughter-in-law said, "You've served your time, now disappear with dignity." My son just looked away. That afternoon, I made one change to the house title that would. I packed 68 years of myself into 3 cardboard boxes the morning I made the call that changed everything. Not because I was running away, not because I was giving up, but because I had finally stopped asking for permission to matter. Let me take you back to the note. The note is where everything cracked open. I had been awake since 5:30 that Tuesday morning, the way I always was. There is something about being a widow that turns early mornings into a kind of silent ritual. You wake up and the first thing you notice is the absence of another person breathing beside you, and then you either grieve it or you get up and find something useful to do with your hands. I had always chosen the second option. My late husband Gerald used to say I cleaned the way other people prayed, with full devotion and no expectation of applause. He was right. I had scrubbed and folded and organized my way through his death, through Daniel's difficult teenage years, through my sister Nina's passing, through every dark season of my life. When I moved into Daniel and Leela's house 14 months ago after my hip surgery, I brought that habit with me like a piece of luggage I didn't know how to leave behind. Every morning I was up before either of them. I wiped down the counters, I emptied the dishwasher, I brewed fresh coffee and set out the mugs. I swept the kitchen floor and tidied the living room, and sometimes on good days I started the laundry. I told myself it was gratitude. I told myself I was contributing. My sister Nina, God rest her, used to shake her head at me even from her hospital bed in her final months. "Evelyn," she said once, her voice thin but sharp as it always was, "you have a bad habit of turning yourself into furniture. You make yourself so useful that people stop seeing you as a person." I had laughed that off then. I was not ready to hear it. I am the kind of person who has to learn things the hard way, and I have learned enough hard things in this life to fill a library. So there I was that Tuesday morning, standing in the kitchen of the house where I had originally lived as a newlywed, the house Gerald and I had bought together in 1987, with a down payment we scraped together for 3 years, the house where I had raised Daniel from birth to age 22 when he first moved out. The house that had been partially retitled when Daniel and Leela moved in 6 years ago, partially, because of a legal oversight neither of them had ever noticed and neither had I, not until a few months before all of this happened. My name was still there, faded but present, on a recorded document I had found while helping Daniel look for his grandfather's old insurance paperwork. I had tucked that discovery quietly into the back of my mind like a seed, not knowing yet what I intended to grow from it. I was wiping the stovetop when I saw the note. It was folded in half and placed deliberately next to the fruit bowl, positioned in a way that made it impossible to miss. My handwriting is large and looping from decades of writing grocery lists and birthday cards. This handwriting was different, precise, controlled, Leela's. I opened it and read it once, then I read it again. "We are not running a retirement daycare." I set the note back down on the counter. My hand was trembling, but not from weakness. It was the particular trembling that happens when your body understands something a half second before your mind does, when your nervous system receives a message that your heart is still trying to reject. I heard her heels first. Leela always wore heels in the morning, even inside the house, a choice that had always struck me as a kind of performance. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a coffee without acknowledging the fact that I had made it, and then she looked at me the way you look at a stain on the carpet that you've been meaning to deal with. "You missed a spot," she said, and tapped the countertop with one perfectly painted fingernail. The surface was spotless. We both knew it. "Leila," I started. "I left you a note," she said. Her voice was not cruel in the loud, dramatic way. It was worse than that. It was bored. She was bored by me. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. "I saw the note," I said. She picked up her coffee and turned slightly toward the window, as if the conversation were already over. "Daniel and I have talked about it. This arrangement isn't working for us anymore. You've had time to recover from the hip. There are places that specialize in this kind of thing. Senior communities, very nice ones." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You want me to move into a facility?" "I want you to make a plan," she said, and the precision of that word, plan, not arrangement, not living situation, not anything that acknowledged the word home, told me everything. "You've served your time here. Now disappear with dignity." I turned toward the hallway, toward where I knew Daniel had been standing. I had heard him there moments before. I could always tell where my son was in a house. 38 years of being his mother had given me a kind of radar that never fully switched off. "Daniel," I said. He was leaning against the hallway wall with his phone in his hand. He looked up just briefly, and then he looked back down. His jaw was tight. He didn't say a single word. That silence was worse than anything Leela had said. That silence was 42 years of my son, whom I had driven to every baseball practice and every doctor's appointment and every school play and every heartbreak, choosing to look at his phone rather than look at his mother. Leela's heels clicked down the hallway and up the stairs. The clicking faded, and I stood in that kitchen alone, holding a dishcloth in one hand and a note in the other, and I looked up at the small framed copy of the house deed that hung near the hallway. It was decorative, something Daniel had put up years ago, a sentimental gesture that had long since become wallpaper to everyone in the house. But I saw it differently that morning. I saw my name on it, Evelyn Ruth Carter. Faded, yes. Partially superseded by the amended title, yes, but present, still there. I set the dishcloth on the counter. I folded Leela's note carefully and put it in my cardigan pocket. And I thought of Nina, sharp and honest even at the end, saying, "You have a bad habit of turning yourself into furniture." It's not anymore. I want to be honest with you about something. I am not a perfect person. I have never been. My flaw, the one that has cost me more than anything else in my 68 years on this earth, is that I endure, I absorb, I stay. When Gerald's drinking got bad in the early years of our marriage, I stayed and cleaned and cooked and hoped. When Daniel pushed me away in his 20s, embarrassed by his widowed mother, I stayed quiet and sent money and told myself he needed space. When Leela made it clear from the very first Thanksgiving that she considered me an inconvenience, I stayed and smiled and found more things to clean. Nina called it overgiving. My therapist, the one I saw briefly after Gerald died, called it conflict avoidance born from fear of abandonment. I call it the stupidest waste of my own life that I can imagine. But here is the other side of that flaw. Endurance, when it finally turns hard. I am patient the way a river is patient, gentle and quiet for years and years, and then one day the bank gives way and there is no stopping what comes next. I made a phone call that afternoon. I had met Mr. Alvarez 3 years earlier when I had drawn up my will after Nina's death. He was a compact, quiet man in his mid-50s with reading glasses he wore on a chain around his neck, and a habit of listening so carefully that you felt, when you talked to him, that every word you said was being properly received and considered. His office was in a small building 20 minutes from the house, and his assistant picked up on the second ring. "I need to speak with him today if possible," I said. "It concerns a property title." "Can I ask what kind of matter this is?" "An oversight," I said, "one that I'd like to correct." The assistant put me on hold for 45 seconds and then came back on. "He can see you at 2:30. I drove myself. I had not asked Daniel or Leela for anything that afternoon, and I was already starting to understand how much lighter a person can feel when they stop asking. Mr. Alvarez sat across from me, with the original deed documents spread on his desk. His reading glasses down on his nose, and he was quiet for a long time after I explained the situation. "The original transfer was recorded 6 years ago," he said slowly, "but the document requires both signatures for the specific clause here, the one covering survivorship rights to the primary property. Your signature was never obtained." "No," I agreed, "it wasn't." He looked at me over the glasses. "Evelyn, do you understand what this means?" "Tell me your version," I said, "then I'll tell you mine." He almost smiled. "It means the transfer was incomplete. The property, legally speaking, still partially belongs to you under the terms of the original deed. Daniel's ownership is legitimate for the portions that were properly transferred, but the core clause, the survivorship clause that gives rights over the primary dwelling, has never been legally settled." "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" I had been thinking about this since 5:30 that morning. I had been thinking, in some quieter part of my mind, since the day I found the document 3 months before. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my cardigan pocket, not Leela's note, my own paper, the one I had written on before I left the house, and I slid it across the desk to him. He read it carefully, he set it down, he looked at me again. "A housing trust," he said. "For elderly individuals who have been displaced by their families," I confirmed. "Transitional housing, temporary but dignified, long enough for people to find their footing." He was quiet again, then he said, "This will not go over well." "No," I agreed, "it won't. You'll need to give them 30 days. Legally, given Daniel's partial ownership, you cannot simply remove them. It has to be done properly." 30 days is fine," I said. "I want it done properly." He nodded once, the way he nodded when he had decided something. "I'll draft the paperwork. It'll take a few days. Come back Thursday." "Thank you," I said. "Evelyn," he paused, "I'm sorry this is where things ended up." "Don't be," I told him. "This is where things should have ended up a long time ago." I want to tell you about those days between the call and the confrontation, because they matter. They matter because they show you who I really am, including the parts of me that are not graceful. I went back to the house and I made dinner. Roast chicken, Daniel's favorite since he was 7 years old. I set the table. I folded the napkins into neat triangles the way I always had. Leela barely glanced at the food. Daniel ate in silence, and twice I caught him looking at me with something in his expression that might have been guilt, or might have been unease, or might have been both. "You seem different," he said finally, pushing his fork around his plate. "Do I?" I asked. "Yeah, quieter, is that the right word?" "I think focused might be better," I said. Leela looked up briefly from her phone. "She's sulking," she said to Daniel, as if I were not sitting 3 feet away. "Let her sulk, it'll make the conversation easier when we have it." "There's nothing to sulk about," I said, and my voice was so even that Leela frowned slightly and looked back at her phone, uncertain. But here is the part I am less proud of. The next morning I was going through the kitchen cabinets, ostensibly tidying, and I found a gift I had given Leela 2 birthdays prior, a set of hand-painted ceramic canisters I had ordered from an artisan online because Leela had mentioned once, almost in passing, that she liked hand-painted things. They were in the back of the cabinet, pushed behind cheap plastic containers, some of them still with the original tissue paper inside. They had never been used, maybe they had never even been unpacked. And I, who was supposed to be proceeding with quiet dignity and cold precision, stood in that kitchen and held one of those canisters in my 2 hands and felt a hot, stupid rush of grief and anger, so strong that my eyes blurred and my hands shook and I almost threw it against the wall. I stood there with that impulse burning in my chest for a full minute, and I thought of everything I had ever given that had been quietly discarded, every meal and every sacrifice, and every careful, loving act that had been received as nothing more than background noise, and I was so angry I could barely breathe. I put the canister back, gently. I closed the cabinet. I gripped the edge of the counter until the shaking stopped. Nina's voice came to me then. "That temper of yours, Evie. You've always kept it so far down that when it comes up it scares you. Stop being scared of it. Just don't let it make your decisions." I breathed in, I breathed out. I went upstairs and I sat on my bed and I took out Leela's note and I read it again and I let myself feel every bit of the hurt and the rage, and then I folded it back up and I thought about the plaque that would one day hang near the front door of this house, built by those who were once told to disappear. And the anger didn't go away entirely, but it organized itself. It stopped being chaos and started being direction. That is the closest I came to losing my composure during those days. I am not ashamed that I felt it. I am proud that I didn't throw the canister. On Thursday, I returned to Mr. Alvarez's office. The papers were ready. My signature in 3 places, his notary seal, and the formal documentation establishing the Evelyn and Gerald Carter Housing Trust, naming the primary property at that address as its founding asset, governed by a board of 3 that included a local non-profit organization Mr. Alvarez had recommended, a social worker named Patricia whom he knew personally and vouched for, and me. I signed with a steady hand. 30 days from certified notification, Mr. Alvarez confirmed. "I'll send the letter today." "Send it certified mail and also by email," I said. "I want there to be no question that it was received." He nodded. "The email will arrive today. The certified letter tomorrow. Will you be present when they receive it?" "Yes," I said, "I'll be there." I drove home and I cooked dinner again. Pasta this time, with the marinara sauce I had been making since Daniel was in middle school. I set the table. I poured water into glasses. And I sat down and I ate and I was quiet and I was patient and I waited. The email arrived at 6:47 in the evening. I saw Daniel's phone light up on the table beside his plate. He glanced at it out of habit and then went back to his food, and then something in his peripheral vision must have caught the subject line, because he picked up the phone with a sudden stillness that told me he was reading it properly now. The color changed in his face. "What is it?" Leela asked, not really paying attention, scrolling through something on her own phone. Daniel set his fork down. He looked at me. He looked at the phone. He looked at me again. "Mom," he said, his voice was strange, tight and hollow at the same time. "What did you do?" "What I needed to," I said. Leela put her phone down. "What's going on?" "There's an email," Daniel said slowly, from a law office, about the house. Leela's eyes moved to me. I kept my face calm and I kept eating my pasta. "Show me," she said. Daniel passed her the phone. I watched her read it. I watched the sequence of expressions that crossed her face, confusion first, then a dawning understanding that drew her eyebrows down, then a sharp, bright anger that was almost like panic. "What the hell is this?" she said. The question was aimed at me. "What did you do?" "I made a correction," I said, "to an oversight in the property title." "You what?" She stood up from the table, chair scraping back hard. "You can't. This is our house. This is our home." "It was my home first," I said. "Gerald and I bought it in 1987. I still have the original deed." "You signed it over to Daniel years ago." "Partially," I said. "There was a clause that required my signature. The transfer was never completed." She turned on Daniel. "Did you know about this? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know," he said. He was staring at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a child, lost, genuinely lost, the way he used to look when he got in trouble and couldn't talk his way out of it. "You're taking the house." Leela's voice had jumped up in pitch. "You're actually taking the house." "No," I said. "I'm giving it to a housing trust, for elderly people who have been pushed out by their families." The silence that followed that sentence was absolute. Then Leela said, very quietly and very precisely, "You vindictive old woman." "Layla," Daniel said sharply. "No," she rounded on him. "She's throwing us out. She's literally throwing us out because she's angry about the note." "This isn't about the note," I said. It came out with more heat than I intended. And I felt the edge of that old anger starting to surface, and I pressed it down deliberately. "This is about 14 months of being made to feel like a burden in the house I built my life in. It's about being told I've served my time. It's about your husband watching it happen and choosing his phone over his mother." Daniel flinched like I had struck him. "You have 30 days, I said. "That is more than fair. Mr. Alvarez's letter will arrive tomorrow in the mail with the formal documentation." 30 days, Leela said it like she was testing the temperature of something scalding. 30 days to do what? Find somewhere to live. We have a mortgage on this house, Evelyn, a financial arrangement. "That mortgage is on the portion of the property that Daniel legitimately owns," I said, "which is the east wing and the garage structure. That is documented in the original transfer. Mr. Alvarez will explain everything clearly in the letter." "The east wing and the garage," she let out a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You're serious?" "Completely." Daniel put his hands flat on the table. He looked like he was trying to hold something down. "Mom, can we talk about this? Can we just slow down and actually talk about this like a family?" "We could have talked about this a long time ago," I said. "We could have talked about it yesterday morning when you stood in the hallway and watched your wife tell me to disappear with dignity, and you said nothing. That would have been a good time to talk." He didn't have an answer for that. "I'm not angry at you, Daniel," I said, and I was surprised to find that this was mostly true. I was sad. I was weary. But the rage had done its job of pointing me in the right direction and had mostly quieted itself. "I am your mother and I will always be your mother and I love you, but love without respect is just habit, and I'm too old to keep performing love for people who only see me as furniture." Leela had sat back down. She looked different now, not angry so much as frightened, and I recognized in her fear something I had not expected. She was not a powerful person. She was a frightened person who had built a hard surface over the top of that fear and called it strength. I didn't find it easy to feel compassion for her in that moment, but I found some. A small amount. Enough. "There are very nice homes nearby," I said, and I let the words hang in the air for just a moment, just long enough for both of them to hear the echo of what Leela had said to me before I continued. "I can give you some recommendations if you'd like. Good neighborhoods, reasonable prices. Daniel's salary is more than sufficient." Leela's jaw tightened. She heard it. She knew exactly what I was doing. She looked away. The days that followed were not peaceful. I want to be honest about that. Living in that house during those 30 days was one of the harder things I have done, and I have done hard things. Leela cycled through rage and cold silence and occasional bursts of what I can only describe as theatrical suffering, designed, I think, to make Daniel feel that he needed to take her side. Twice she told Daniel that I was insane. Once she said I had no right to destroy what they had built. Once, and this is the one that actually got under my skin in a way the others didn't, she said to Daniel in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't hear, "Your mother never liked me. She's been waiting for a chance to do this from the beginning." I heard that standing in the hallway, and my first instinct, honest, raw first instinct, was to walk into that kitchen and tell her every single time I had tried to build a relationship with her. Every Christmas gift, every birthday card, every invitation to lunch she had declined, the hand-painted canisters in the back of the cabinet. I wanted to lay all of it out with exact dates and specific details and make her sit with the evidence of how wrong she was. I stood in that hallway for a full 10 seconds. I breathed. I thought of Nina. I thought of Mr. Alvarez's quiet efficiency. I thought of the plaque, and I walked upstairs without saying a word. That was, I think, one of the better decisions I made during those 30 days. Not every piece of ammunition needs to be fired, some you just put down. Daniel came to me on the 27th day. I was sitting in the small bedroom that had been mine since I moved in, organizing the last of my things, when he knocked on the half-open door. I told him to come in. He stood just inside the doorway for a moment, looking at the boxes, and then he sat on the edge of the bed the way he used to sit on the edge of my bed as a child when something was wrong and he didn't know how to say it. "You're really leaving," he said. "I'm really leaving," I confirmed. "Where will you go?" "I have options," I said. "Friends I haven't seen in years because I was too busy trying to earn my place in this house. A small apartment I've already put a deposit on. A garden club someone invited me to 3 times before I finally said yes." He was quiet. He had Gerald's hands, I noticed, the same wide knuckles and long fingers, and he was pressing them together in his lap in a gesture so familiar it hurt. "Mom, why didn't you just say something sooner? Why didn't you tell me it was bad?" I set down the book I had been packing. I looked at him properly. "Daniel," I said it every morning, with every meal, with every clean room. I was saying it every time I stayed up waiting for you to come home in college, and every time I sat in a hospital waiting room, and every time I kept quiet when Leela dismissed me in front of her friends. People who love each other don't always use words, but people who love each other also pay attention. He pressed his hands together harder. I didn't pay attention. "No," I said, "you didn't." "I'm sorry." His voice cracked on it just slightly, and I heard in that crack the little boy who used to cry easily and had spent 30 years teaching himself not to. "I'm really sorry, Mom." "I know you are," I said. "I believe you." "Is it too late?" I thought about this honestly. Not the sentimental version of the answer, not the clean and forgiving answer that would make us both feel better in the immediate moment. "To rebuild something real," I said. "No, I don't think so. You're 42, not 82. But it has to be real, Daniel, not phone calls on holidays, not guilty dinners where you stare at your plate. Real." "I want that," he said. "Then show me," I said. "Not today, not this week. Over time, with consistency. That's how you show me." He nodded. He stayed sitting on the edge of the bed for another few minutes, not saying anything, and I let him stay. Sometimes people just need to sit somewhere and feel the weight of what they've let happen. It's not nothing, it's actually something. On the 30th morning, I placed a new note on the counter. I wrote it the night before on good stationery, in my large looping handwriting, and I folded it precisely and set it where Leela's note had been, beside the fruit bowl. "This is not a retirement daycare, it's a second chance." Then I picked up my small suitcase and my 2 remaining boxes, and I walked out of the house where I had spent the better part of my adult life. The morning air was cool and smelled like the neighbor's honeysuckle, the way it always had in spring, and I stood on the front step for just a moment with my face turned up toward the light. I did not look back at the house, not because I was indifferent to it, but because I had already said everything I needed to say to it. I drove to my new apartment with all the windows down. I want to tell you what happened next. Not all of it, because some of it is still happening, and some of it I only know secondhand, but the parts that matter. Leela and Daniel moved out. They found a condo 20 minutes away, and from what I understand it is a perfectly nice condo, and from what I understand further, the process of being forced to adapt gave them both something of a reckoning that they perhaps needed more than they would have liked. I am not their therapist, and I am not invested in the details of their marriage, but I am told by a mutual acquaintance that Daniel has started attending counseling. I do not know whether that is true. I choose to believe it. The housing trust took possession of the property properly, with Patricia, the social worker, overseeing the initial transitions. The first residents moved in about 4 months after I left. I helped coordinate the setup remotely, communicating with Patricia and with Mr. Alvarez, choosing colors for the common room, helping draft the house guidelines. It was some of the most satisfying work I have ever done. We kept the kitchen exactly as it was. We kept the big window in the living room that faces the garden. We kept the fruit bowl on the counter. I heard through Patricia that the house filled with an energy she had not expected. Shared meals that ran long, people learning each other's names, a woman who had been put out by her son and daughter-in-law playing piano in the front room for the first time in years, because there was a piano there that no one had thought to remove. An older man who had not laughed in months, laughing at something a housemate said over coffee. I was not there for any of it. I chose not to be. That was not my space to inhabit anymore. I had planted the seed. The growing was for other people. The apartment I moved into is small and full of light, and I have filled the windowsills with plants. I rejoined the garden club. I have had coffee with friends I had neglected for over a year. I sleep well. I wake up at 5:30 and I make my own coffee and I sit with it by the window and I watch the neighborhood come awake, and I do not feel the need to earn my place in the morning by making myself useful to anyone but myself. Daniel has called, twice in the first month, awkward calls that were full of long pauses, then more frequently. Then last month we had dinner together, just the two of us, at a restaurant downtown. He arrived before me and stood up when I came in, and we sat for 2 hours and talked, not just traded updates but actually talked, the way we had when he was young and unguarded and still thought his mother was the most interesting person he knew. It was careful, it was fragile. But it was real. Leela was not there. I do not know if she and I will ever arrive at anything resembling warmth. I hold the door open, but I do not hold my breath. Some things are possible, not all things are owed. Daniel told me at that dinner that he had gone to see the house, had driven by it, looked at it from the street, noticed the changes, new window boxes, a ramp installed at the entrance for accessibility, people on the front porch in the late afternoon. He said it looked like it had always wanted to be that, and he looked slightly stunned when he said it, like the realization had surprised him. I told him I thought that was probably true. And then, because I am me and I cannot entirely leave well enough alone, I said, "There's a plaque by the door now, have you seen it?" He shook his head. "Go look at it sometime," I said, "when you're ready." He went the following Saturday. I know because he texted me a photograph of it. No words in the message, just the photograph. The plaque on the wall beside the front door, small and simple and permanent. Built by those who were once told to disappear. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I thought about Gerald and all the years we spent in that house. I thought about Nina and all the things she was right about that I didn't want to hear. I thought about the note on the counter and the click of heels and my son's eyes finding his phone instead of mine. I thought about the canister in the back of the cabinet and the 10 seconds I stood in the hallway and chose not to fight. I thought about Mr. Alvarez's reading glasses on their chain and his patient, careful voice. I thought about a woman I had never met playing piano in a room I knew by heart, laughing in a kitchen I had scrubbed by hand more times than I could count. I thought about all the people who were told, in one way or another, that they had served their time, that they should disappear with dignity. And I thought, we are not furniture, we are not backdrop, we are not the quiet labor that makes other people's lives more comfortable and then gets folded away when it's no longer convenient. We are people who built things, we are people who endured. And when we finally stop enduring and start acting, when we finally stop cleaning kitchens out of fear and start making decisions out of love for ourselves, the things we build can last longer than anyone expects. I wrote Daniel back one word: good. Then I put my phone down, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and watched the morning light come through my windowsill garden, moving across the leaves of things I had planted for no one's benefit but my own.